Shir. Good to have you all back. And today's topic of discussion. If you got my message that I sent out, if you didn't get the message, please tell me, and I'll make sure to add you onto my WhatsApp broadcast. Okay, after the share, not right now. Right now, we have people watching, and we're going to stick to our plan for the moment. So, unfortunately, throughout COVID, I think we've experienced a lot of mortality. We faced death head on. We've seen so many of our loved ones, so much more than we were used to, of people leaving this world. And that, I think, unfortunately, was not the most pleasant of experience. I mean, never is death a pleasant experience, but I do think we saw a lot more of it during this period. So what we're going to focus on for the next week, and we're going to take different topics and aspects of life and death that we're going to explore together. But for today and tomorrow and next week, we're going to discuss why are we so anxious about death and dying. For many people, the abrupt finality of death makes life itself seem futile. Like, what am I here for if I'm gone so fast? And the truth is, are you gone so fast? Every day we could live in the most meaningful way. So by exploring how our life force, our immortal soul never ends, but merely shifts roles, we begin to view life and death as two harmonious steps on the same journey. I'm sorry, Stephen, when I'm talking in the middle of a shir, especially since we're being broadcast everywhere, I can't just interrupt and stop. Okay, we wish you long life and strength. Just sorry, I'll ask that everyone could just be patient. When you have questions or comments, don't forget there's a whole lot of other people in the audience. So we wish you strength and long life, but not to interrupt. Rather, I see when your hand goes up, but if you keep, I have to get my thoughts out and I have to be able to express it. Otherwise, it's going to be a very interruptive shiur and it won't work. So I'm just asking for everyone to understand that I'm not ignoring you, God forbid. There's also people online wanting to ask questions. So I see when you want to ask a question, and I will take moments to recognize everyone who has questions. But it will be very disruptive if we keep having interruptions. So I thank you, and I wish you long life and strength. Just so you understand, I can't do every 2 minutes. Otherwise, we won't get very far, right? Okay. With that in mind, what we are going to be discussing today is how to deal with the natural fear of death. Anyone know what the name for it is? There actually is a name in the English dictionary for the fear of death. Yes, it's a phobia. It's called Phanetophobia. Never heard of it, but you got part of it correct. There you go. It's a phobia, the phobia of the fear of death. Of course, if we're preoccupied living, then we're not going to be involved and worried about this fear of dying because we're busy living. So that's where we have to reconcile. On the one hand, Judaism is a culture of life. Chai, it's about living. We just came from Yom HaShoah and Yom HaZikaron. When is Yom HaZikaron? I'm already confusing my dates. Right, so today is the 2nd. So Yom HaZikaron is coming up in 2 days. Yom HaZikaron, it's a day of remembering those of the past. And then there's Yom HaAtzmaut, which is about celebrating the present. We have a culture of life in Judaism. And that is our focus. Our premium value is we put life first. Now, of course, we are studying Pirkei Avot, and there's a very interesting and seemingly contradictory expression in Pirkei Avot. Because on the one hand, it says that this world is just the antechamber, just the entrance, just a foretaste of the next world. The next world is the great banquet hall, is what the Mishnah calls it. This is the corridor. So if that's the case, this is small stuff. You're soon gonna, when we get to the next world, that's the big deal. But at the same time, the Mishnah tells us that there's nothing like a moment of teshuva, masim tovim, meaning of good deeds. In the next world, you can't do the kindness, the good deeds that we could achieve, that we could do, the gestures in this world. So the next world might be a mighty fabulous place, but it's only in this world where we could actually achieve and do all the good that we're able to, that God put us in this world for. So we have to be aware and cognizant of that as much as the next world is a wonderful place, this world still has its advantages. Okay, by the way, if at any point, both onliners and in-personers, if you're confused by something I say, let me know, and then I'll try to clarify. Okay, but let's go through some ideas, through some notions that we might have, and see how we could learn the Torah perspective. So, for example, is death important? Like just thinking about death, our perspective on death. Is it something you're just curious about, not interested at all? Is it relevant to life? How about I tell you this, and then we could discuss it again next week. But the perspective that we take on death from a Jewish perspective actually very strongly influences our emotional well-being and our life choices. So it's not just about what I eat, it's about all my behaviors. And we'll see what I mean as we go through this, that realizing our mortality is not just another aspect, just another element of okay, death happens. But rather it informs life in a very strong way. Very interestingly, we're studying the tractate of Sota now between Pesach and Shavuos, and it discusses a lot about a wayward woman. What's a wayward woman? Well, it's a whole tractate of the Gemara. It discusses a particular promiscuous lady who is secluding herself with a guy who's not her husband. And her husband warned her, don't be with that man. And she still does so. Well, the Gemara talks about all the procedures and everything that's involved and the lessons. It's a very interesting tractate of the Talmud. What's interesting is the Gemara tells us we learn a lot about the laws of marriage from the laws of divorce. And it's fascinating because in Jewish law, you're not stuck, you're not trapped in that relationship. So what we're saying here is you learn a lot about the laws of life, not the laws of life, but how to live life meaningfully by deriving from the aspects and elements of afterlife, of death. So that's something to consider. I'll give you a little joke, a riddle, a question about the sota, just because it's a very serious topic today. I think I'm going to have to throw some humor in here and there, because death is very serious. We're going to have to lighten it up a bit. So let me ask you a question. If you study the tractate Sota, you know that this wayward woman, she has to drink a certain potion. It's very interesting, the laws, it's in the Torah actually. This isn't just the Gemara, this is in the Torah. It's in the portion of Naso, which we're going to read in a few weeks' time. And there it describes that this woman is warned by her husband and she doesn't listen to him, and now she's secluding again with this man, and he has witnesses, but she denies all allegations. And he insists that he has witnesses that she's indeed behaving in this inappropriate fashion. So the Torah says she has to drink the bitter waters, mayim marorim. And what are the bitter waters? Well, we take the portion of the Torah, actual Torah scroll, and the letters, the words, including God's name, are erased and into these waters that she had to drink. And she had to drink it in the temple. If she was guilty, then she would experience a horrible death. She would explode. But if she was innocent, then indeed she would be showered with abundant blessings, and her husband was proven to be wrong and shouldn't be so accusatory of his wife in that way. No, well, the Gemara is long and complicated. I won't go into all of it now, but it's interesting. Well, it depends on her now, if she wants to stay with him or not, etc., etc. So here's the question, the riddle I have for you. Why does she have to drink these waters? Why couldn't she get a intravenous injection? You're in the hospital. God forbid you should never be in a hospital. But you know that if in the hospital you don't have an appetite, or they have to give you certain drugs, they have to administer off. Usually it's done by IV, right? So why couldn't she take it intravenously? Why did she have to dafka drink it? Actually, it says it right there in those 10 commandments. Thou shalt not take God's name in vain. Okay. Told you we have to lighten up the discussion a bit. Yeah. All right. So we discussed, we definitely need some clarity about the eternal nature of the soul, the greatness of the hereafter, and the importance of life in this world, which we're going to discuss all these aspects and ideas. To many people, life is the space of time between when we are born and when we die. At a funeral, I recall once hearing a rabbi talk about what's most important is that dot, the dash. Right? It says that the person was born in 1901 and passed away in 2022. Wow, what a nice long life. But those numbers are irrelevant. What's important is the dash. How did you live your life in between? I once heard the story about a gentleman who unfortunately was caught in a fire. He lived in a magnificent home, and the fire department came rushing over, and thank God they rescued this man from the fire in his house. Lucky for him, he was a well-to-do person. He had good insurance. He wasn't worried. He was so grateful to the fireman. He said, "Name your price. I would like to compensate you. I'd like to pay you and thank you for saving my life." What would you say if you were the fireman? How much? $1 million? Huh? Well, the fireman said, "No, I can't take anything. It's my job. I'm not allowed to take a cent from you. But I'll tell you my price. Make sure the life I saved was a life worth saving." We have to realize what is life, okay? And life is a lot more than just the material things we collect, because we're not going to take them with us after we go. So how are we going to live our life in the most meaningful and purposeful way, realizing the Neshama, the soul of life, it's part of us beyond death, and we'll discuss what do you mean beyond death, because what is the afterlife? Okay, it's a whole experience that we're probably not aware of. Not that I could tell you from experience, don't know, but it's something that we're going to share the Torah perspective on. And so the main ideas that we will try to cover, how many of them did I just say already? In the coming week, please God, is the Jewish perspective of life and death, that if we could get and understand that perspective, first of all, that whole concept of Phanetophobia that we discussed, hopefully shouldn't be relevant. You don't fear death. Not that we're looking forward to it. I was in Nando's a while ago, and they asked me what kind of Coke. My friend wanted a diet. I said, "No, I don't want a diet." So that's we don't want to die yet, but not to fear it. And I have the same fear of, God forbid. But maybe if we understand the importance, the purpose of life, maybe then it won't scare us as much. Another idea is that understanding what we quoted in the Mishnah before about Olam Haba, okay? That understanding what is the next world, what lies beyond this world, where are we going to? Right? Remember the story of Einstein? Told you that one many times. Yes, you're nodding your heads. You remember it or don't remember it? Albert Einstein was on the train, and the train conductor was collecting the tickets. And when it came to Einstein couldn't find it, and he's looking in this pocket and that pocket. Too many tzatzkes and paper lach and notes, and can't find the ticket. Lucky for Einstein, the conductor recognized him. And he said, "Ah, Mr. Einstein, we know who you are. We recognize you. It's okay. You don't need to produce a ticket. I know exactly who you are. Don't worry about it." Okay, good. The conductor continues going on the train, collecting tickets from others. If he didn't recognize them, he didn't treat them so nicely. No ticket, off the train. Well, an hour later, the conductor's coming back, and he sees Einstein still searching for his ticket. In this pocket, in that pocket, under and over. And he says, "Mr. Einstein, I told you already. I know who you are. I trust you bought a ticket. It's okay. You don't have to search for it. It's okay. Sit down, relax." Einstein looks at the conductor. He says, "Mr. Conductor, I also know who I am, but I need to know where I'm going." So that's another point we have here. Where are we going? Right? We have to know what is in store. What is the next world? What's it all about? Okay, is afterlife after life? What does that mean? What's in store for us? And this is all part of what we have in mind to cover, and in no particular order, but this is the concept. So what we're going to do right now, I would like to just open on Google this word that I told you, Phanetophobia. Okay? What does Phanetophobia mean? Let me give you the Google Wikipedia translation. Okay? Because after all, we are exploring this journey of the soul. And if you wanted to know about life and death, you don't need to talk to me. You have doctors, you have professionals, and I'm glad you've all come here today to learn with me. But what do I know? Well, I'm going to share with you the Torah's perspective, the Jewish traditions and insights about these topics. Because, as you know, our planet is populated by plenty of peoples with a plethora of perspectives. Some fear death, some actively embrace it, some pursue it. Let me tell you from Hatzalah, I've seen, Le'aleinu, God forbid, but there are people who look for it, right? We get called to suicides, unfortunately. And then we deal with the aftermath, the mess of it afterwards. Others try to ignore it altogether and focus on the here and now, right? Well, don't worry about tomorrow. We'll cross the bridge when we get there. So we obviously want to know what the Jewish perspective of all this is. And since we're seeking the Jewish perspective, let's see what Torah tradition, what Mishnah, what the Gemara, what Jewish law, what Jewish mysticism has to say. But one of the unique ways we like doing things in Judaism is we like to ask questions. We just came from Pesach. We ask a lot of questions. So let me ask you, why are we even bothering to discuss this? I know a few people asked me about it. That's why we decided to go with this topic now. But obviously, some people there's a universal fascination with death and all the aspects that are associated with it. But is the phenomenon of human expiration truly important enough that we should really, that Jewish law should talk about it? What do you say? Very important. Do you ever wonder about these things? Absolutely. So let me ask you, should we stick with this topic? Is it interesting enough to explore? All right, good. If that's the case, we'll continue. Remind me of a story. After being with his date all evening, Abe couldn't bear to spend another minute with her. Right? Earlier, he had arranged to have a friend to call his cell phone so that he would have an excuse to leave if something, happened. Right? You ever did that? I know back in those days you didn't have cell phones. Don't worry, I did this in my day too. Right? You arrange somebody to call it, and if it's not going so well, it breaks the monotony, and you have where to go. Oh, sorry, I have an emergency. Okay. So the phone rang, and sorry. Yeah. Oh my goodness, I can't believe, right? And he turns to and goes, I'm sorry, I have some terrible news. My grandfather just died. And guess what? She says, thank God. She's like, what's that? He says, because if your grandfather didn't die, then mine would have had to. Yeah. Shame. So I told you, we're going to have to throw a little bit of humor here in this here and there just so we could keep this interesting. Okay, so just as we think about it, there's obviously a lot of questions, and you'll have questions. And what I would like to remind everyone is if you have a question, maybe just jot it down. If you're online with us, you could just WhatsApp it or email it or put it in the chat notes here to me. But if you're here and I'm talking and you don't want to forget what you're asked, do what Rosalind's doing. Have your pen and paper, write it down quickly. This way you could just get that down, get that out of the way. I just think there's a lot to discuss in this area. I don't even know where to begin. But since there's a lot of information, and sometimes people consider some information useless information, so I'll tell you another story. This boy was about to go out on his first date. But because he wasn't much of a conversationalist, he was nervous that he wouldn't have anything to talk about. So he spoke with his sister-in-law, who obviously was already married, and asked her, what do you do? What do you do? What should I talk about? So she said, there are 3 subjects that always work, okay? Food, family, and philosophy. All right? So he goes out on his date, he picks her up, they go out to a restaurant, and they ordered some food, and then they just stared at each other for some time. You know how awkward that gets. And then he remembered what his sister-in-law told him. If it really gets boring, you can always talk about food, family, philosophy. The 3 F's. So he starts off, he asks her, do you like matzo balls? She says, no. He's getting a little bit nervous again. What does he talk about? Get a little bit uncomfortable. A couple of more minutes. And I go, oh, family, right? Tell me, do you have a brother? She again says no. Right. What do we do now? And then he remembered what his sister-in-law said. Philosophy. So he said, if you did have a brother, would he have liked matzo balls? I know, along the way, I might give you some useless information, who knows, but that's just the way it goes. If I don't have what to say, I might just mumble and jumble and say things that you might not find relevant, but that's just the way it is, right? But with that in mind, the ideas that we're going to discuss, there's lots to explore, and we'll just figure it out together, right? Obviously, I do have a preset lesson, but we have slides, and we'll do our best to make it as meaningful. Hello, Sharon, and welcome back. So good to see you. Okay, so obviously, there are many important issues that we want to look at. Okay? Now, I think, maybe everyone has different things that you want to discuss. We'll get to those things. But let's talk here about a few areas related to what I just put on the screen. Okay? Number 1, we talk here about philosophy. Yes? Death poses philosophical and theological issues. Is there a purpose to death? What happens to the soul? Is there such a thing as heaven and hell? Reminds me of another good old joke. I'll leave it off for now. Right? Does Judaism believe in reincarnation? What happens to the soul? Do we get reincarnated? Do we come back into this world? Okay. Why do some people enjoy long lives and others, unfortunately, get cut very short? Right? Why is that? Now, I can't give you the answers to all these questions, but as we say, there's a lot of philosophical and theological issues that we'll try to get to. Okay? And I just, to think that these are all the philosophy, it's all a lot we could touch on, and no doubt we'll try to get to as much of it as we can in the limited time that we have, but that's why I'm spreading it over a week for this whole topic. So, anything else in the philosophical range that comes to your mind? Let's talk about the emotional issues. Whoops, sorry. There we are. Is it working? Okay, I'm going to have to just change chargers because this computer looks nicely charged. Give it a minute, ladies and gents. I'm just going to be right back. Yeah. How long does it take for the neshama to leave the body when a person passes on? It's a good question. We'll get to it. We'll discuss these things. We'll discuss the levels of soul, and we will discuss those ideas. Not yet today. We're going to get to it in the coming days. Okay. And I see another question here from Mervin. Is in Tehillim it says that the days of our lives are 70 years or 80. If we have enjoyed these years, can we ask for more health and more years? It does say so in Tehillim that 70, 80 years is the average lifespan, but certainly it's not chutzpah to ask for good quality of life beyond those years. So I hope that answers your question. Let's look at where are we up to? Emotional. There's lots of emotional aspects that death poses, and facing one's own mortality is scary. It could be a source of anxiety, and then there's the open and raw wounds that are left in the wake of the loss of a loved one. The heart is torn, and the mind has no answers. How and when do we recover from the devastating blow that is the loss of a close loved one? There's emotional aspects. And of course, practically speaking, how do we prepare? Whether it's ourselves or someone near and dear, can we ever be prepared? Physically, spiritually, do we put all our things in order? What are the Jewish funeral and mourning traditions and practices? What is the significance? These are things we're going to talk over the next couple of weeks. The best ways to memorialize departed loved ones. All right, what we shouldn't say to somebody who's grieving. These are all parts of the discussion. And we will draw on the age-old Jewish wisdom and traditions that shed light on these areas. We'll address the mind and soul by delving into the philosophers or psychologists or mystics' understanding of death, the afterlife, reincarnation. We'll get to those things. We'll look at the emotions, the heart, by exploring the emotional element of death. see the Torah's perspective for coping with the loss of a loved one. And we will focus on the practical by outlining the steps that we have to take in preparation, without the phanetophobia, without the fear, but realizing that it's part of life. Death is part of life. What do they say? The only two inevitables are death and taxes. That we could deal with it and know it. I mean, I feel terrible. Like, it seems like such a morbid topic, but because it's a reality. If we talk about it now, when it's, so to say, out of context, maybe, God forbid, when we're in the moment, we'll be better equipped to handle it. So that's really, the way I see it, and hopefully it's not too morbid. Okay. So here is a question that you may have been pondering. What feelings does the subject of death and mortality evoke in you? Okay? Think about the feelings. Is there, sadness? Okay, any other thoughts? A finality? Well, you spoke about fear, you spoke about finality, you mentioned, hope. Okay, is death to be embraced or ignored or forgotten about? Through the course of life, we all experience highs and lows. We have good days and bad days. And we all know and we've experienced physical pain, emotional pain, frustrations, setbacks, illness, deprivation, broken relationships, reminiscing, FOMO, fear of missing out, shock, loneliness. Go ahead.
Anxiety or lack of preparation, curiosity, and anticipation.
Good. These are all, now anticipation, that you threw that in there with the anxiety, that's a very interesting combination, because I guess the anxiety is because of the anticipation. We don't know what to do. I mean, life throws us all types of curveballs, whether it's betrayal, financial uncertainty, whatever it is, right? But death, nothing compares to it, remotely even, right? You said it's a finality. It can't be undone. Death is final. Every other trial, tribulation, difficulty, affliction, challenge has an expiration date, at least theoretically. Things will change. Things will get better. The day when we hope and anticipate it will have passed by. But death is final. It's absolute. It's irrevocable. It's not changeable. So, especially if you want to consider our own death. Since you mentioned, just remind me your name?
Miriam.
Oh, okay. So, Miriam, it's especially if we want to consider our own. Now, that makes it, a relative. Unfortunately, both my parents are gone, and with my mother, I sort of knew it was coming. The doctors were warning us, even if I was living in denial. With my father, it came by total shock and surprise. I remember I was actually giving the shiur right here when I got that phone call I was standing here, and I got a phone call from my sister. I was like wondering, why is my sister calling me at 10 o'clock in the morning here, which is 7 hours behind in New York, 3 a.m. What 4 a.m. whatever. What's going on? Why is she calling me then? Until she just said something like Baruch Dayan Emet, and I was like, well, who are you talking about? What are you talking about? Right? It wasn't something to anticipate. But let's put our own in perspective, because as Miriam, you said, there's the anxiety, there's the anticipation. So obviously the idea, the finality of death, yes, it could apply to others, and it applies to, my father's gone, he's no longer here, But especially when we consider our own mortality, I think it falls into place here. So that's part of the discussion. And that's why it's so scary. We talk about, you're familiar with the FOMO, fear of missing out. When you have, let's turn it the other way, simchas. You're watching, you see the pictures and the videos, and you see everybody's at a family simcha, and you're not there, and all of a sudden you just feel like, hey, I'm not there. I remember my mother telling me she wants to be at my wedding. She never made it. So perhaps there's that fear of missing out in important events, children's weddings, the birth of grandchildren. Right? So while the word fear could legitimately be used to describe our feelings at the thoughts of missing those simchas, but perhaps the better word is, who said, sadness or disturbance. The emotion, we can't compare it to the potentially debilitating fear that could result when a person considers how all that they did and all that they lived for will come to a crashing halt at a certain point. And who knows when that will be. But can we really live our life with that fear? Or should we be just living life and not be worrying about that fear? We certainly have to focus on the now. But if we're living with that phanetophobia, the fear of death, then how can we? Some people suffer from fear of shamefully meeting their maker and the possible punishment in the afterlife. Who was it? One of the great sages, when he was asked, I think it was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. He was ill. Okay, he was a great sage. You might be familiar with him. He was the one who met with Vespasian. The Gemara tells us he met with Vespasianus when the temple was being destroyed, when Jerusalem was besieged by the Romans. And he feigned death to escape from Jerusalem. Remember that story from the Gemara? And when he wasn't well, a number of years later, the Gemara relates, he's lying on his deathbed. And his students ask him, such a great, holy tzaddik, a righteous, pious, greatest of the greats. And they asked him what he sees or what he feels. I don't remember the exact discussion. We could always open the Gemara. And he says, I don't know which direction I'll be taking. I mean, here you're looking at the greatest sage of his time, and he doesn't know where he's going, to heaven or hell. He doesn't know where he's going to go. That's a fear people have. Did I live my life the right way? Did I live a life that was worth saving? So, in fact, we know there's a Mishnah that tells us you should do teshuvah every day. Why? Why? Today's not Yom Kippur. Why do I have to do teshuvah? Sorry, I confused it. The Gemara says, do teshuvah the day before you'll die. That's what the Mishnah says. Do teshuvah. Hold on. The day before I die. Do I know when I'll die? That's exactly the point. You don't want to live life with regrets. Don't do things that you'll regret afterwards. You won't live life with regrets. Okay? So there are valid reasons for fearing death. Many good reasons. But Is it the fear of death itself? Or like is it so paralyzing? What is it about death that we fear? The repercussions? What are the repercussions? We're gone. That's it. Done. Okay, so that's one aspect. That I live my life meaningfully? Will I face the day of judgment and all the deep secrets will be? Somebody once said to me that, when you come to heaven, they play a video of your life and you get to see all the mistakes, all the time wasted, all that. And you go, oh my gosh, how did I mess up there? And how did I mess up there? And how did I? So can I live my life more meaningfully? But maybe talking about it now will get us to try to muster the courage to say every moment of life, carpe diem, seize the moment. Let's live it more meaningfully. And this is why talking about the topic maybe makes us uncomfortable. It reminds us of our deep-seated fear of the day that we will no longer be, that death is forever. And how will I deal with it? God has granted us human beings with a special gift of self-awareness, that we have an awareness of ourselves, okay? It's that detached knowledge that we have of our own character, of our feelings, of our emotions, of our desires. We're aware of our own awareness, yes? That we're self-aware. Now, this self-awareness, the Gemara tells us, continues after a person's passing. We'll discuss that later on. Yeah? Uh-oh.
You say death is irreversible, it's final, and yet the Torah speaks of resurrection of the dead.
Oh, very good. Sure. So perhaps what I'm saying, it's irreversible in the world how we know it. In the world that's why we're going to try to put on other glasses and actually see that from a Jewish perspective, there is a return, there is resurrection, there is reincarnation. So we pray for Mashiach to come today. But we could be a reincarnation of a previous generation. And until Mashiach does come, if God forbid my soul expires now, I might have to come back to return and do something as a rectification for something that I missed during my lifetime here. So yes, there's a lot of these elements, but I'm trying to first paint the picture from the earthly perspective, from the way we understand things just as mere mortal human beings. And then get into the Torah perspective and understand it from a deeper angle. Now, there's a difference between a human and a machine, okay? Now, maybe even between humans and animals, we could discuss that too. But we all know that almost all of the functions of a human brain, like the ability to analyze information, to control mechanical functions, to have our whole nervous system working, are all controlled by the brain. Through modern technology, scientists have been able to replicate a lot of that in computers. All right? In fact, computers can be programmed to do most of the human functions even better than us. Imagine when the calculator came out and people were able to start calculations without sitting there with a pen and paper doing it all. Imagine how, just think about how much time it saved us and all the computer programs that we use. The difference is that human mental actions are accompanied by a self-awareness of what we're doing that the computers do not experience. And we discussed this just before Pesach, you recall? In what context? The matzah. Remember? We talked about the difference between machine-baked matzah versus hand-baked matzah. Because as even a supercomputer which does not, which could do who knows what, right? 200 trillion calculations per second. I mean, you have very sophisticated machinery today. My phone could probably has a much better memory than my brain has. But it doesn't observe itself, okay? It has no no consciousness, no self-awareness, right? The bundle of electronic parts is simply a very fancy stimulus response machine that's programmed to respond to data input. It's programmed by humans. And even though it can do things more efficiently than us, it doesn't have that same element, right? To think that a computer has self-awareness is like saying that the computer's power cable, just look at this right here, is I don't know, could contemplate the meaning of what it does. This wire has no mind or brain to think of what it's doing. It's just doing what it was programmed, what its function is. So, of course, science fiction books and movies are filled with all types of, horror stories that involve rogue machines that are self-conscious, but that's not reality. Self-conscious machines have yet to have really been invented. They don't exist other than in science fiction. And from a Torah perspective, I don't think they ever will come to existence, because that is a uniquely human character trait that we have. And as we're in the days of Sphira now, counting up to Matan Torah, to Shavuos, this is a time of self-reflection. Self-awareness is very important. Now, like many things, it could be beneficial and it could be detrimental, depending on how we use it. The fringe benefit of this gift of self-awareness is that awareness of our mortality. The knowledge that this self of which we are aware is fickle, is temporary. That although I'm here today, I don't know what tomorrow will bring. How did my mother used to say? Yesterday's history, tomorrow's a mystery. I don't know what tomorrow will be. Today's a present, tomorrow's a gift. Very good. And that's the truth is, even today's a gift. That's why it's called a present. So today's also a gift. Seize the moment. But, pardon? Forgive. And is that easy? You know, Jewish Alzheimer's is to forget everything but the faribbles. According to modern science, a lot of people have this fear. It's an entirely normal part of the human condition to be worried, to be anxious, to especially maybe even as we get older, to think more so, what does the future hold? What is tomorrow going to bring? I don't know. That's why I have to be aware of today. And that's why the Mishnah says very clearly to do teshuvah, which is exactly what you're saying, which is that, you know what, if I do teshuvah, I won't have any regrets tomorrow, because today I live my life the best way possible. So, understanding that we have the fears, let me just read something to you. I'll try to give you guys copies of this, I don't know when, maybe even tomorrow, if I could get a chance to put it together. Okay, but for today, let me read it to you. Just get it up here. Okay. This is from a article. It's here it says as follows: mortality has haunted us from the beginning of history. For 4,000 years ago, the Babylonian hero Gilgamesh. Anyone heard of him? Gilgamesh? Okay. It says here he was a king of the Sumerian city-state of Uruk. Anyone know where that is? Where? Oh, wow. And this must be, if that's the case, this must be like the times of Abraham and Sarah, no? Or before that? Aha. Okay.
That's after generation before Abraham.
Before Abraham. Okay. Very interesting. So it says here that he reflected on the death of his friend Enkidu with the words, "Thou hast become dark and cannot hear me. When I die, shall I not be like Enkidu? Sorrow enters my heart. I am afraid of death." Gilgamesh speaks for all of us. As he feared death, so do we all, each and every man, woman, and child. For some of us, the fear of death manifests only indirectly, either as generalized unrest or masqueraded as another psychological symptom. Other individuals experience an explicit and conscious stream of anxiety about death. And for some of us, the fear of death erupts into terror that negates all happiness and fulfillment. Interesting. So, let's unpack this for a moment. Some time ago, a few decades ago, a group of social psychologists advanced a theory known as TMT. Anyone familiar with it? It says it on the board. Terror management theory. What is terror management theory? It's essentially a theory about the effect of death on life. Okay, it's our awareness of death, and it influences many elements of our life. And this theory posits that our awareness of death and our efforts to cope with this awareness are the impetus of a wide variety of our human activities. Right? Many modern social psychologists agree that our perspective and fear of death actually, as we said before, informs a lot about our life, the way we live it, our psyche, our behavior, our general life choices, and there's a lot about this. And the truth is from a Torah perspective as well. But we'll get to that in a moment. Let's just talk for a moment from a TMT, from a terror management technique approach. Humans cope with mortality by denying their own mortality, by avoiding thinking about it. Just don't want to think about it. Doesn't exist. Just going to live here and now. We repress the terror. We don't want to think about this. We enter a state of denial. Can't be. Not me. Right? Anyone else? So this whole terror management theory also explains why, sadly, terrorists are so effective in instilling terror, because they blow to smithereens all those mental and emotional constructs or obstructs that we put in place to avoid facing our own mortality. Right? Terrorists so effectively capitalize on our greatest fear, terror, our own mortality, the fear of not being here anymore. That's why they get everybody all pent up. That's what they're so good at. That's why they're terrorists. So, for many people, the past 2 years living under COVID has certainly provided a perfect storm of fear, of anxiety, of, am I next? Right? Have you not seen? I mean, I've been doing a lot of reading on the effects of COVID-19. And let me just share this with you. It says here, underlying these fears is the omnipresence of uncertainty, fear of the unknown. Even if one becomes ill or loses their job, The unknown persists. How long will I be ill? Will I be able to get another job? It's a never-ending spiral. That's TMT. That terror management theory. So COVID-19 certainly did a good job in adding to it. And as we started our discussion, seeing how many more funerals were being conducted here by the Chev during this period. I mean, many people afraid. Who's next? We were brought face to face with our mortality during this whole COVID period. So certainly it triggered, we don't know, is there a cure for it? Is there another wave coming now? What are we up against? It certainly triggers a lot of anxiety amongst people. Fear of the unknown, fear of another lockdown. These are certainly a lot of concerns that many people have. Here's another interesting one. The current pandemic is the perfect storm on which to focus our anxiety, paranoia, and obsessive thinking. In actuality, the coronavirus is a direct death threat, but it is also intensified by death fears that have been successfully defended against prior to this time. The current rise in death anxiety has led to an increase in a variety of psychological symptoms. And one of the TV channels in America, this is from CNN, they reported that 2/3 of the people that they interviewed in this survey they conducted said they experienced more depression, more anxiety, more stress, and had more trouble sleeping than before the pandemic. Could you relate to any of that? I mean, these are studies conducted by the TV channel that they said that they felt was what the results they found. Now, that's certainly part of the fear of death. Let me just see if I got this here. Yeah, right here you can see how COVID-19 certainly contributed in many ways to this. And maybe tomorrow I could give you this chart where you could see the results of questions they asked. They surveyed in the US adults about what their fears of COVID were. And some said they were very afraid, others said they don't know. I think the majority said they're somewhat afraid that COVID will somehow affect them. They don't, people were afraid. People still are afraid. It's very interesting for me to note the difference between South Africans and Americans, by the way. On our Pesach retreat, none of the Americans wore masks, yet a few of the South Africans did. What's that? It's just reality. I'm not talking about right or wrong. There will always be different perspectives. I will also say this. I find that the more Haredi community is also less worried. If you go to Torah Academy, you hardly see a mask. If I go to my shul, everybody's wearing masks. So I'm just saying, again, we could analyze, we could figure out if it's right or wrong. I'm sure in their perspective they're right. Harold, you say they're wrong. I'm not going to determine who's right and who's wrong. I'm just presenting the case. And as presenting the case, I'm telling you, look here, we have probably 90% masked as we're in this room. And I was at shul this morning, I don't think I saw a single mask. In my shul, I think it was 100% masks on Shabbos and last week. So again, it's different communities, you see different realities. I'm always keeping my mask with me because I know, look, myself, I don't feel like I necessarily need it, but if I'm feeling amongst vulnerable people, I will put it on because I don't want anybody to be offended. Also, if I'm feeling that I'm a little bit fluey or under the weather, as I felt a little bit, I will keep that mask on when I'm next to people because I don't want, God forbid, to affect anybody. I don't know what I've got. Is it flu or maybe, who knows? Maybe I got some COVID. So who knows? So we're still dealing with that reality. Okay, we advertised a event last week it was a broadcast, a Zoom, and it was advertised as beyond the pandemic. And I got some flack from people telling me, "What are you talking about beyond? We're still in it. We're still in the pandemic." So we could see that there's a lot of stuff to discuss, whether it's philosophically, intellectually, emotionally. There's the practical journey, which we have to discuss. And of course, we hope and pray to God that we will all be safe and that we'll live to a ripe old age and that we should not suffer, God forbid. We shouldn't have any pain and the sorrow of death. Please, God, we will be saved from all of that. But at the end of the day, we know that the implications of, we don't know what life will bring tomorrow. And so we have to, if we could discuss these ideas, which we will tomorrow, please God, then I think that even if you have already a perspective on it, but to get the Torah's perspective, it will certainly add a lot more to to the way you see things in this realm. And I think that's the objective of what we want to achieve, is to explore death, but more so to inform how we want to live. So, which is? Yeah, we're certainly not in control. I think COVID taught us a lot of that. But I'll have to end with a joke that you all know. You remember the story, the minister, the priest, and the rabbi? They're all sitting around and discussing what each one wants people to say at their funerals. It's joke number 784, right? The minister says, "I want the people to talk about how generous I was to the poor." And the priest says, "At my funeral, I want them to talk about how I visited the sick." And what does the rabbi say he wants them to say at his funeral? "Look, he's talking, he's moving." Okay, with that in mind, my friends, just to sum up what we discussed quite a bit today, actually. And I think you put it very well, Rosalind. We realize it's beyond our control. But I think tomorrow we'll look a little bit more about who we are from a Torah perspective. And why is learning about death important and even relevant? And we saw that there's this fear of death. And we want to know how to deal with and cope with it. Not everybody finds this topic fascinating. For many people, this is very morbid, not worthwhile. But I think if we could look at it from the Torah perspective, we'll certainly gain better ways of understanding and seeing the Torah's way. And I think we'll live our lives in a more meaningful and purposeful way. Yes, Miriam?
Which is relevant to every single field you care to apply to.
Yeah.
Knowledge is the antidote of fear.
Yeah. Absolutely. Brilliant. Knowledge is the antidote of fear. Very good. Any other questions, comments, alternative perspectives? Okay, with that in mind, my friends, please enjoy some lunch. If you could after, no, I'm just kidding. Of course you could.